idea of slip, like how does one define that? And I'm the piece about we are, and our forte is sex addiction, but I am not myself well versed in chemical addictions, drug addictions, alcohol addictions. So I don't know. Do they define slips differently? Because people use the word slip as in I did a relapse behavior, but I didn't do it for very long, or I stopped and I backed out of it, or something like that.
So does this feel
how do you guys describe slip?
Well, I think there's different ways we could define sobriety, right? And what that looks like. And there's different ways that people do that. I guess for alcohol, let's say I'm an alcoholic, what's that? Someone, instead of, drinking liquor, I had a beer, or that doesn't really fly with chemicals. Usually it's an abstinence model. Yes. So I think that's the difference we talked about with chemicals versus process addictions, that the goal of a process addiction recovery is not abstaining completely from the behavior. It's changing your relationship with the behavior. So yeah, I think, and also I'm curious now with slips versus relapse, because when you talk to, especially if we're talking sex addiction and this person's in a relationship, the betrayed partner typically doesn't have a nuanced appreciation of what a slip versus a relapse is. At least that's what I've experienced, versus, on the addict side that they may. So yeah, I guess your question, Jeannie, how do we define it?
Yeah, I'd be curious of how do you all define it? And then, I don't know, we don't have a substance addiction person here with us today, but if that world defines it differently, for me, okay, I'll just share me. No, there is no slip. And I also use the SAA model, Sex Addicts Anonymous 3-circle model. And so again, just for our listeners, that is a way of organizing and understanding one's addiction. Outer circle, self-care behaviors. Middle circle, I would say caution, beware behaviors. They might cause you or to trigger you or think about more sexual relapse. Inner circle behaviors. Inner circle is, if I do this behavior, I've relapsed. So in my mind, clarity is key. And so if you do an inner circle item, you've relapsed. It's not a slip, it's a relapse. I think now with that, I want each person to individually decide for themselves, where is the line of relapse? For example, and this is what I'll compare when I do with alcoholics. Did you relapse when you walked in the bar? Would you consider that a relapse? Did you relapse when you ordered the beer? Did you relapse when you put the beer to your lips? Did you relapse when you drank from the beer? Like, everyone is different on that. And so I think that's part of the process of creating clarity about what are your relapse behaviors. But once you've done that, if you do one of those behaviors, it's a relapse. There is no slip. You might further define your relapse behaviors. But in my world, I have a real reaction to slip because I don't want it to sound like a minimization of an action.
I think on the addict side, I'll say, because I completely agree, because sometimes it's used to justify, well, I just did X, Y, or Z, and it wasn't that bad, which may, on the surface, I think the distinction I often hear with a slip versus a relapse, someone may have engaged their bottom line inner circle behaviors. They may have crossed the line. And yet, what did they do after? Did they say, oh, screw it, I've already gone this far, I might as well just make it count, and then they go on a bender for 2 weeks? Versus someone who's like, oh man, I did violate my sobriety, but I'm going to go reach out to my sponsor. I'm going to go talk to my therapist or my support team. And then they get right back into recovery. To me, that's a big difference between what someone does post. It's not used to justify, but I do think there's a difference in how someone acts, after they violate their sobriety.
I think that's really important also with a partner, because what I hear a lot is, okay, you had a relapse, but you didn't do anything. You didn't use any of the tools of recovery. And so that's what I'm more upset about, because if you're not using those tools, then that's going to set you up to keep doing this behavior. And that's really scary for me.